House in Baltimore and country to the other. We still talk Baltimore Orioles baseball here, and unlike our competitors, we do it candidly and honestly here because, well, we can. And the things have not gone well for the Baltimore Orioles. Luke Jones is here right now to discuss, I think of the Donald Sutherland role in Animal House when he says, I'm not joking. This is my job. This is what I do. Many folks have turned away from the Orioles at this point, certainly watching the Caps or watching the NBA and LeBron and whatever, golf coming up and all the other things that can distract you at the beach and whatnot. But this has been a tough time for those of you, I would say, who are glued to this, literally watching this and doing the WTF thing of, like, what could change and when. And I know with the baseball draft, there's been this whole, well, we'll get to the dealing of Machado and what we're going to do with Adam Jones and how we're going to deal with Buck at the end of the year and all that. We'll deal with that in Britain after the draft. Well, here we go again, Luke. They're going to draft some baseball players in the next 48 hours, right? And God bless those souls who, hey, the Orioles draft. Good news, you got drafted. Bad news, Orioles draft. But this has been just unwatchable baseball on the field, and I know you've been subjected to that, man.
It's been awful. And you know me, I'm the guy that's not going to overreact. I'm the guy that understands, and like any knowledgeable baseball fan, that there's ebbs and flows to a season. Even the best teams are going to look really bad at times. Even some of the worst teams are going to look pretty good for at least a few stretches over the course of a season. And we saw the Orioles go through that homestand a few weeks ago where they were okay. They actually looked like a representative baseball.
It's like a 500 team.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't great, but they won 4 in a row. They had a homestand, winning homestand, and you're like, okay, well, this is. No one was saying the season was saved or any crazy proclamations of that nature, but you're saying, okay, the horrendous start they got off to, maybe things are normalizing a little bit more, and they're just going to be bad, not terrible, not in the historically terrible conversation. And that certainly has turned back into that direction here recently. And about the only good news, you mentioned the draft, with the Orioles being rained out Sunday, off day on Monday, well, they're guaranteed not to lose a game for about a 72-hour period by the time they're playing the Mets at Citi Field in New York. It really... we throw out lots of terms of teams being terrible, things being unwatchable. This is as close as it gets to unwatchable because it has just been atrocious, really across the board. I mean, the offense specifically of late, they've scored more than 3 runs just 3 times in their last 17 games. The defense, which we've talked about being bad, has arguably been even worse recently, and the 2 games against the Yankees, I mean, the outfield defense in particular was the absolute pits. I mean, there was a stretch on Friday night when Trey Mancini, Adam Jones, and Joey Rickard all misplayed balls within a 2-inning stretch. They had the 6th inning on Saturday night where they committed an error on 3 straight batters. I mean, this is so far below the line of what any major league team should look like, and it's amazing. We've talked about this so much as far as the future and Dan Duquette not being under contract after this year and Buck Showalter and the free agents. It's much been discussed, but for things to be this bad when you're 17-41 as the calendar has just turned to the month of June and you have not made a single meaningful change or a single meaningful statement from leadership of the organization to proclaim this being completely unacceptable and to vow changes and to say, look, we're figuring this all out. We're not going to fix this overnight, which everyone knows that. You can get as ticked off as you want. This isn't being fixed overnight. It's going to take a while, and you hope it doesn't take years and years and years, but it's clear that this isn't an easy fix kind of a situation. So at the very least, I know it's a Captain Obvious statement, but that doesn't mean it still shouldn't be made to your fan base. And instead, it's been radio silence. It's been, to borrow a Pink Floyd song, is there anybody out there?
Hello!
Really, I mean, it's just, that's how bad it's been. And to the point you made as far as how many people have tuned them out, I mean, you can feel it on social media. And that's not to say that people don't care anymore. I think they care, but it's how do you emotionally
Why am I going to give you 4 hours on my Tuesday night? I got a cat. I got LeBron James. I got the Caps. I got movies. I got Netflix.
Sure.
I got good weather. I got to walk in the park. I got Ocean City 3 hours away. I got books to read. At least I do. A lot of folks don't read books anymore. But, yeah, I hear you. And I don't know what. I'm going to talk to Marty Conway about that this week as well. I don't know what you do. I know even the broadcasters have gotten chippy, right? Like, I retweeted something that Joe Angel tweeted the other day that just would have been unthinkable in the Peter Angelos era, that a paid representative of Oriole baseball could be critical. I don't know how the hell you can't be critical. The 17-41. By the way, I did the math. I went back and saw the 88 Orioles on June 3rd of that year. They were 11-41. So, we're starting to get to the point where they're catching that sort of a pace, right? Where, they lost the first 21 and managed to, go 11-20 the rest of the way. I don't know where the bottom is, but I'm assuming, and this is the weird part, Luke, and this is the part I keep talking about every day, it's going to get worse because Machado's going to get eliminated. Adam Jones could get eliminated. Britton might never get here, and if he does, he'll be eliminated. Brock, same thing. So, and they're going to be trying more double A's and more Hesses and more stuff. I can't imagine that they're not a worse team in August and September than they are now. I don't know where the surge is going to come, where they're going to go into the pennant race. I'm looking down on the schedule. There's Red Sox and Yankees games, littered throughout August and September. They're going to play those games without the best players they have now, which isn't very good, right?
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying, and look, in principle, I agree with that general sentiment, but we also know that it is a long baseball season, and things don't always make sense, and sometimes you can actually start playing a little bit better. I go back to 2010, that team, this was right around the time that they canned Dave Tremblay. And look, we knew Dave Tremblay going into that season most likely was not going to be the Orioles manager whenever this team would start to win again, and we knew that they had good young players. Many of them were either already in Baltimore or were on the way. And you talked about guys like Machado and then Bundy and Gausman and then Adam Jones and Wieters and guys like that matured. But they were horrendous. That year on June 3rd, they were 15-39. Remember, they started 2-16 that season. But
that was the McPhail sweater season.
Yeah.
That's how I remember it. The really bad one was the McPhail sweater, but at least there was a McPhail sweater video, right? As embarrassing as that was, and I wouldn't have done it that way, and I still, in retrospect, think it was disgraceful and poor judgment, and certainly something that it looked like Peter sent him out to do in the same way this guy down at Pennsylvania Avenue sends that goof Sarah, whatever her name is, out every day to lie. I get it, but the organization needs to do something, and there's been nothing here. But the college draft is their thing now, right? They're going to knock it out of the park here this week with that, right? That's going to be their PR spin on this, is they've drafted the next Machado, right?
Well, the draft's important. And here's the funny thing about this. And look, I'm not going to say that Gary Racich has done an unbelievable job with the draft by any stretch of the imagination. But here's the thing. What really gets masked here, because they have so little meaningful involvement in the international market, they haven't been awful drafting players here over the last 5 or 6 years. Now, has it been top 5, anything like that? No. But my point is, everything gets magnified when you completely sit out the international market, even if you're doing a decent job drafting, and I think it's been at least decent in drafting. Now, you can talk about developing pitchers or whatever you want to do, because there's drafting and then there's developing. Those are two separate things. Are you identifying talent? And then if you identify that talent, are you developing it properly? And certainly we can debate that part of the equation. But it just, you cut yourself off at the knees as an organization. So yes, they're going to draft some baseball players starting Monday night, and they're picking 11th. And there's certainly a potential when you're picking that high to find a decent player. Now, you're not going to have a Manny Machado type talent fall into your lap, most likely. And some of the names at the top of the draft board, Casey Mize, the pitcher from Auburn, a couple infielders, Alec Boehm, Wichita State, and I know Nick Madrigal from Oregon State, or a couple infielders. You look at this farm system right now; they have some outfield prospects. They have some pitchers, even if they're not as close to being major league ready as you'd like in a perfect world. But you really look at middle infield, and the cupboard is really bare there, especially. But some of the individuals I just mentioned, any of those guys falling to 11 would be surprising now. But that said, you're in a position with your organization where, when you look at the state of the major league roster, you look at the farm system. Is it the worst in Major League Baseball? No, I don't think so. But it's still closer to the bottom than the top. You draft the best possible player. I mean, we talk about this with the Ravens all the time, but that's what your focus needs to be on. And you have to hit a grand slam with your draft because you don't play ball in the international market. So that's where I am a little more empathetic to the amateur draft people as far as identifying talent and drafting. The pressure is on you that much more to be just perfect in what you do. And we know that's not going to be the case because you sit out and you completely neglect yourself from half the talent pool. And I guess maybe it's not half as far as a perfect 50-50 breakdown. But
well, my people come from Venezuela, so I'm partial to all of this, and I watched the World Baseball Classic, and I've been awake. I mean, it's just an inconceivable. They're the only team once again, they were the only team that didn't broadcast in HD. They're the only team that breaks contracts with, routinely with medicals. They're the only team that does things a certain way. And this is one of those things that they're the only team that does it that way. And you know what? They're the only team that is it right now. They're the only team in last place in Major League Baseball right now, too. They're the only team there, too.
Well, and it just comes down to this. Unless you are incredibly rich and you're just going to make up for it with money, or if your farm system and your amateur drafting, the amateur draft itself, you are so much better than everyone else in that regard, and you've found a couple tricks. You found some kind of a hidden cost that you're, or some kind of hidden value that you're exploiting. How are you going to overcome that? I mean, it's something that it's maddening. It's completely illogical. It's whatever you want to call it. It's completely unacceptable to just sit there and say, we're going to completely sit out such a meaningful portion of talent replenishment that you can participate in. I mean, look at the Yankees right now, and some of the international talent that they've added in recent years and is now coming to fruition for them. I mean, just look at the AL East, look at the All-Star game every year, and it's insane, absolutely insane that you're not participating in any meaningful way in international scouting and the international, the participation of picking international players, signing international prospects. It just goes back to, if you're trying to find light at the end of the tunnel as far as the Orioles, this season's over. We know that. I mean, I think I did the math. They would have to play like a 98 or 99 win team the rest of the year just to finish 500. That just shows where they are at this point. So it's not about this season. It's not about trying to improve this year's club. Who cares about that? It's about trying to use the assets that you do have to hopefully turn that into more prosperity in the future, and that involves guys like Machado and potentially Jones and Brad Brock and Zach Britton, and having a conversation with Jonathan Scope, and just go down the list. But in the meantime, when you're completely sitting out the international market, it puts so much pressure on you from a financial standpoint to make up for that in other ways, and for your amateur draft to be that much better than everyone else. And that's just not realistic.
Well, we're going to find out in the coming days here as they bring back the new baby birds and talk about that. Luke Jones joining us here. Of course, Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, still monitoring the Orioles while I'm trying to hoist Lord Stanley's goblet this week out in Las Vegas. The Orioles taking on the New York Mets here after a brief respite. They're going to be making up games now with the Yankees through the weather over the weekend. Certainly the weather was not very cooperation friendly for the Yankees fans, and I know you sat it out on Saturday and it never rained, and then they get a game in, then on Sunday they never even try. This doesn't make it any easier either, right? I mean, it's been the choppiest year, and I know that one of the headlines that even on our site over the weekend was just how many rainouts there have been in Major League Baseball and how the weather has wreaked havoc with all of this. It's going to make for a stickier summer for pitching, especially for teams in the race, right?
Oh, there's no question. I mean, teams like the Orioles, they'll call someone up and they'll pitch, and they probably won't pitch well, and life will go on. But for teams like the Yankees, who have already dealt with a slew of cancellations, they had a suspended game against Washington. I mean, they've had all kinds of crazy stuff happen. It's been unbelievable. I mean, the number of postponements, I want to say on Sunday I saw a statistic. I think it was 2 shy of what it was all of last year, and we're only into June. I mean, I know the summer, the weather gets better, but that doesn't mean you still don't have thunderstorms and some postponements and some rain and inclement weather. It really has been crazy. I'll give the Orioles credit for Sunday at least. They were proactive in looking at what was a pretty miserable forecast, and the Yankees had a doubleheader on Monday, so I think that probably contributed to not waiting around. But I mean, we've seen it. They had the postponement earlier in the series. They waited around 2 hours before they decided to bang it, and then you go back a couple weeks ago, the Phillies game that they postponed after a 3-hour wait. To which I quipped, they're handling these weather situations about as well as they play baseball, but it really has been difficult for the entire league, and we talk about this all the time with what happens in April and seasons starting in late March and cold weather cities and only having a handful of teams that have retractable roof in their home ballpark, and it's really made things messy. And again, for the Orioles, it's kind of inconsequential. I know Buck Showalter will always harps about how difficult it is to play a doubleheader, and he's right. I'm not going to disagree with him, but in the case of the Orioles, from a competitive standpoint here in 2018, certainly not going to be all that moved by that because, it doesn't matter as far as wins and losses for them at this point. About the only drama that's left in that regard is if this team's going to be able to pick up the pace enough to avoid losing 100 games, and at this point, I can't feel too confident about that, that's for sure.
Man, there's about 5 stories in the Onion here, right? Like from ownership and where they are to management and what that represents, and Brady Anderson, who sits, as the consigliere through all of this stuff and wondering who's picking these baseball players the next couple of days because, there's some notion that Dan Duquette actually does work there and does pick these things, and it'll be him in charge of making trades. To me, that's like stupid talk. You know what I mean? Like, I don't really think Dan Duquette is picking these baseball players this week. I don't think Dan Duquette's doing much of anything these days other than waiting out the end of his term and trying to do it with a hallway at the end. I mean, I don't believe what they tell me because I've been around a long time, but I don't know what to believe other than 17-41 and last place. And I believe that Buck's going out of contract and Machado's going out of contract, but I don't even believe they're going to deal Machado. I would not bet my life on that. If you gave me a number in Vegas this week when I'm out there and say, give me $1 that they will absolutely deal him, I wouldn't even bet on that at this point. I think they're so unorthodox, they're so unpredictable in everything, in every way. Now that it's hit rock bottom, I mean, there's no telling how this is going to go over the next 90 days or who's going to be left and who's going to make decisions. I know this much, and this is my history. They'll lie about it. They'll put it off. They won't answer questions. They won't be accountable. They won't be available. And if they are, they won't be honest. And if they are, they'll send some chump like Duquette up to the front of this who is lame duck. But, that's what I'm going to be monitoring here over the next 60 or 90 days, and that's what I'm going to be writing about in my Dear Orioles series, which is where is the accountability? Who's really drafting these players? Who's making these decisions? Why has no one been fired? Why does Buck still have a gig here if he's a lame duck manager on a 300 baseball team? I mean, there's so many. It's sort of like the Trump government. There's so many questions, and there's just not going to be an answer. I mean, posing these questions in tough ways, they'll come when they come, but I don't see anybody jumping out in front of this to say, come back to the ballpark, be a part of this, here's our plan, here's our strategy. That's not the way this family's worked for 25 years, man. I'm not expecting that to happen next week. I'm really not.
Yeah, I mean, to the last point you made, I mean, and this goes back to what I said at the beginning of our conversation. Look, we know it's a Captain Obvious statement to say that everything's, that this is completely unacceptable. We apologize to our fans. We expect more. Our fans expect more. They should expect more from us. We're not going to be able to fix this immediately, but we're going to exhaust every avenue. We're going to go to the greatest lengths to make sure that we get this right. And we ask that you stick with us, and we're going to do ticket deals and do all that kind of stuff. That would mean something, even though you wouldn't actually be making any tangible change immediately with that announcement. That still means something. Just because it's the Captain Obvious statement doesn't mean it shouldn't be made. And it shouldn't be Buck Showalter. It shouldn't be Dan Duquette. And I'll use a Ravens example here. When the Ravens tried to make John Harbaugh the spokesman when they were going through the Ray Rice thing, that was completely inappropriate. It'd be completely inappropriate now to ask Dan Duquette or Buck Showalter to be the spokesman when they're not even here, contractually speaking, beyond the end of September. But it's funny because I remember you talking about this a little bit earlier in the season, and basically, this phrase kind of popped into my head as I was watching this team on Friday night kick the ball around, not score any runs again, waste what was a pretty solid outing from Andrew Kashner, and lose another ball game. But it comes down to everything is so bad right now on the field. Everything is completely uncertain and unknown off the field. There's no semblance of a direction. There's no semblance of a plan that's known to any observers or certainly the fans. And it really comes down to this. When everybody's at fault, and face it, you can point blame to just about anyone other than maybe Manny Machado, and you could even say, well, Machado's playing short and he's better at third base, and so you could even go to that length if you really wanted to. But my general point, when it's everybody's fault, it can quickly become nobody's fault if you're not careful, and that's where the lack of accountability comes in. And you just say, well, the pitching hasn't been great, and the pitching's been pretty darn bad, let's face it. But you can point to the offense, and you point to the offense and say, well, what about the defense? And the defense points to the other two and say, well, those two segments are bad, and the players have been terrible, and you can point to the coaching, and the coaching says, well, these are players with track records who've been horrendous. And you can continue to point the finger elsewhere, and then what happens after a while? It becomes, well, then even though it's everybody's fault, it kind of reverts to being nobody's fault, and then no one's taking the fall, and then you're just drifting along, and that's what this thing has become when you're sitting there at 17-41, and it's just, and I've made it very clear, I'm not the guy that's going to sit here and say so-and-so should lose his job, but I'm also at the point and say I don't really have a good argument to say why so-and-so should keep his job. But when you're
or just where's the plan? If the plan is Buck's going to manage this mess the rest of the way,
them. Right? Announce that, and you announce that and say, "Look, this season's been a disaster, but we still love Buck Showalter. He's done a lot of great things here. We think he's going to do a lot of great things here in the future, and we're going to be in a transition, and we're going to have some younger players playing, and we know that it's going to be bumpy for a while, but we've seen what he's done. I'm a Buck guy, or whatever. Whoever's making the statement, then extend him." Don't have him flapping in the wind. Same with Dan Duquette. We all, it's been expected. Most people assume he's not going to be back, and I haven't heard anything to change that. But if by some strange, stretch or some twist in the plot, you decide that you do want to keep him, then extend him and announce that right now. Instead, they're just continuing to do nothing, and they're just kicking the can further down the road, and you're getting closer and closer to the trade deadline. And then beyond that, you're getting closer to the end of the year. And just, what are you doing? I mean, over the weekend, we hear about the Orioles possibly considering signing Hanley Ramirez. I mean, really? Really? A middle-aged, another DH first base type for a team that's 24 games under 500? What in the hell are you even thinking about doing something like that? I mean, I'm not anti-Hanley Ramirez. It just, what's the point? What is that doing? If you're
I couldn't believe that. I mean, you're going to take the Red Sox trash now? I mean, another designated hitter? Why don't you bring back Sherman Obando for crying out loud.
Well, here's the thing. Look,
it's like Jim Thome gets him at bats.
I think Hanley Ramirez, to me, isn't finished as a baseball player. And look, I think it's quite possible, and part of this is why would he want to join the Orioles? He's getting paid a ton by the Red Sox to sit at home right now. Why wouldn't you just keep yourself in shape? Your agent continues to work the phones, and at some point in the next 6 weeks, some team that fancies themselves as a contender is going to have a first baseman or a DH get hurt. And there's your opening then. You're not going anywhere with the Orioles, and the Orioles aren't going to pay him any real money. We know that. So it's weird from his standpoint, but my point is, if you ask me right now, do I think the Orioles are going to bring him in? No, I don't think that's going to happen. But the fact that Dan Duquette didn't even dismiss that abruptly and say, no, why the heck would we consider that? That makes you wonder, what exactly are the priorities here? Like, what is going on here? I've said all along, the best deal for Manny Machado isn't necessarily today, but if you're focused on even a little bit on the possibility of adding a Hanley Ramirez, what exactly are you doing here? Like, what is exactly going on here? And again, it just goes back to my point as far as when everything's completely bad and everything's at fault, then everyone just gets so caught up in pointing the finger at something else that nothing's getting done in the meantime. And it really is, it's astonishing at this point that it has been this bad and no meaningful changes have been made to this point. Even, look, and I have nothing personal against Roger McDowell or Scott Coolball, but who can you really point to at this point in time other than Manny Machado? I mean, really, who can you point to at this time and really make a great argument for them to continue to be here long term? I mean, even some of their young players, and look, I'm not ready to give up on Trey Mancini by any stretch of the imagination, but he's really been pretty awful since the beginning of May. There's just so few things that you can point to right now.
Well, nobody would give them anything for Trey Mancini, right? I mean, your project for my project or whatever.
Well, no, I'm not.
But I mean, into the trade market, if you're trying to get younger, right? In other words, all right, we're going to give you, Adam Jones, but we want a real player too that we're going to have after 8 weeks in order to give you a better prospect, right? I don't know, but the creativity side of this goes back to who the hell's making these deals. When it was McPhail, I think we could say in the aftermath that we would have a level of confidence in the same way that when Ozzie Newsome drafts, and I know we've been up and down the river, we have some level of confidence that he at least can identify talent. I don't know that Brady Anderson can do that. I'm not convinced of that. I'm not convinced because Brady Anderson could juice up 25 years ago and hit 50 home runs and run around and look good and do posters and whatnot, that he can identify the 11th pick in a Major League Baseball draft and get that guy to the big leagues. I'm not convinced I've known Brady Anderson a long time. I'm not convinced that that's his skill set.
Well, and to go back to the draft, because I've heard you mention this, I'm not so sure Dan Duquette isn't picking the players. Look, Dan Duquette, he's been at the ballpark, so it's not as though he's, completely either out of the building and is only collecting a paycheck because he's under contract. It's not like that. Look, do I think Dan's going to have autonomy to make trades? No, of course not, because we know that's not.
Do you think it was Dan Duquette's idea to have Chris Tillman around?
But no.
Okay, well, there you go. Well, if it's not his idea, then he's not running the place, right? I mean, period, right?
But if he's not running the place, that doesn't mean Brady Anderson's completely running the place either. What the issue here is, you have a very unclear chain of command, and you have 4 or 5 individuals involved. But do I think Brady Anderson's picking the players in the draft? No, I don't. I really don't. I'd be surprised by that because, frankly, I'm not sure Brady has the interest to do that part of it. No, seriously. I mean,
well, then maybe he shouldn't be running the franchise.
Well, and I'm not saying he should be. And look, I mean, he's already been quoted recently as saying he doesn't know if he'd want to be a general manager, and had the gall to say that he'd consider being a team president, but doesn't know if he'd want to do the day-to-day stuff that it requires being a GM and
because being a president's easier
and waiver claims and things of that nature that Dan Duquette does, quite frankly, and is still doing to some degree. I don't think I don't think this is a case where Brady's completely running the show at all. I think it's choppy, and I think it changes from day to day, and I think there's certain things that Duquette still does and things that Buck Showalter has influence in and things that Brady Anderson has influence in and things that the Angelos brothers have influence with, and it just becomes so convoluted, and that's where there's such uncertainty as far as how this all plays out. But but as far as has Brady become a de facto GM and Duquette doesn't have any say in anything at all? I don't really get the sense that that's how it's working. I think it's much more choppier and inconsistent as far as how it works. And we'll see what they can do with this draft. And then once the draft is over, we're not going to have any idea what this draft's going to look like for a few years. I mean, baseball especially is the truest of the sports when it comes to that notion. But
yeah, we don't give the draft report card tomorrow morning.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. I mean, I said to you before we even got on the phone that even some of the biggest baseball fans know a handful of names. I mean, you knew Bryce Harper, you knew Steven Strasburg, you knew Manny Machado. If you go down the list, Dansby Swanson. I mean, big time prospects. Yeah, you know those guys. Carlos Correa a few years back. But beyond that, it's such a crapshoot. And again, it's not to say I don't think the Orioles have been incompetent drafting baseball players in this current regime. It's just that the standard has to be so much higher for their drafting because they don't do anything internationally.
They're unorthodox in their...
Yeah, I mean, just imagine right now if the Ravens... I mean, this is akin to if the Ravens decided, for whatever reason, they were no longer going to pick players
from the Big Ten.
Even go a step further.
Yeah, bigger than
they
that.
decided they weren't going to pick players in even-numbered rounds in the draft. So they were only going to pick players in the first, third, fifth, and seventh rounds. And the second, fourth, and sixth, they would trade away their picks all the time, or sell away their picks, as the Orioles have done with selling their.
Or decide to only sign people from small schools.
Yeah. I mean, it's just that's how insane this is, and it just makes things that much more difficult for your organization. I mean, I don't know how to spell it out any more clearly than that. And look, no one's saying that you should only do international signings either, or that you need to be at the top of the list of the 30 teams.
But you need to participate.
Play ball, participate. Yeah. Give it a shot. Be the team that spends. Try to be 25th in international spending rather than 30th by a gigantic margin. Just be in the bottom 5, but not dead last. Is that too much to ask? It's not, but it feels that way based on the way that they operate. And again, it makes the outlook for the future that much more gloomy. I mean, it's just not good, and it's just such a wasted opportunity because you see how many great international talents are thriving in today's game, and they're fun to watch. They're great players, and they make your baseball team way better. How about that?
He is Baltimore Luke on Twitter. He is Luke at WNST.net. Luke Jones, of course, joining us here for all things baseball. I'm rocking the red and headed out to Vegas. All of our WNST coverage brought to you by our friends at Royal Farms. Real fresh, real fast. Make sure you're using that Royal Farms app when you're pumping your gas. You're going to get your points. You'll get your Western fries and your tasty fried chicken free of charge. If you're doing that, use the Royal Farms app. That is, I got that right here, the ROFO Rewards on the YouTube WNSTV channel as well. Also brought to you by our friends at Cole Roofing. Tell you what, we're getting the hot weather out there, and there's been a lot of rain. If you've got a corporate commercial roof space out there, don't let it goof on your roof. Get it looked at. Cole Roofing and ColeRoofing.com. Bill Cole will be joining us at various points this week. Also want to give a shout out that when the rain clears, our friends at Compass Point have 36 holes of action for you down there in Pasadena. Close to home, my man Robert Kennedy going to be joining us this week. We'll be talking some Shinnecock here down the line as well. Compass Point Golf and their night golf coming up next weekend as well. One of the popular things they do down there, kicking the ball around. I have a hard enough time playing golf in the daylight, but they have fun playing in the dark at Compass Point Golf. That's Compass Point with the silent E. I am Nestor. I'm out in the Buy at Toyota.com Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device. By downloading the TuneIn Radio app, we do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. Our morning newspaper ships directly to your email inbox each and every morning at 7 a.m. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness at PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life, guaranteed. Also, the Laurel entries back in the because Pimlico's not there anymore. We're back to Laurel for June racing on the weekends. All the entries on the front of WNST.net as well as in our morning newspaper. Dennis is going to be here on Thursday, driving you home and getting you ready for Game 5 of the Stanley Cup Finals. I'll be joining him from Vegas on Thursday afternoon. That's 3 till 5. That is the SSV on WNST. And, of course, Coons Ford, Security Boulevard, sponsoring our WNST text service. That happens anytime there's breaking news, and Luke does a great job of getting that out, especially when they eventually deal Manny Machado. If they deal Manny Machado, who the hell knows what they're doing? That's part of my Dear Orioles series. That is coming, beginning after the Stanley Cup. I'm working on it right now. I'm writing letters to John Angelos and Brady Anderson and Buck Showalter and Adam Jones and Manny Machado before they all escape. Well, I don't think John's escaping, but the rest of them. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. I'll be on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, anywhere the Stanley Cup is flying, anywhere Oriole baseball is bad, and we got OTAs this week with the Ravens as well. Luke will be out there, so plenty of stuff happening as we enter June with a chance for the Caps to win the Stanley Cup. Please, God, just once. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson. Baltimore, we never stop talking Baltimore sports.